There are very few games in history that have redefined an entire decade of gaming. In the 2000s, it was Minecraft. Released in 2009, it permanently redefined survival crafting and community driven development, becoming what is now the most commercially successful game of all time. For the 2020s, we had Expedition 33 breaking the Game Awards record for 13 nominations and 9 total trophies. Sandfall Interactive pushed the somewhat niche genre of JRPGs well beyond its limits into a transcendent experience that has already gone down as one of the greatest games of all time. In the 2010s, the game of the decade was The Witcher 3. Just like how every mainstream shonen anime copied Journey to the West for decades, The Witcher 3 set the standard for what story based open world RPGs could become in 2015, and we've never looked back since. All the great RPGs of 2020s, like Ghost of Tsushima and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, draw massive inspiration from The Witcher 3. Everything from the combat style to the skills integration to how the open world is structured, you can see Witcher 3's fingerprints all over their DNA. With it coming up on its 11-year anniversary this coming May 19th, join me and let's review this legendary masterpiece together. But before that, here's a quick summary of how I rate my games. I'll be judging the game out of these 10 different categories and will be giving a score for each of them out of 10. Each category will be broken down into subcategories so it doesn't feel like I'm just pulling a number out of my ass here. For context, 1 is awful, 5 is average, and 10 is perfect. Scores can also go beyond 0 or 10 if I deem the game has achieved some unprecedented success in a particular category for their release date. For graphics, combat, open world, and game systems, I will be also using a pioneer curve. This is something I do when reviewing all my games, and it basically protects older games from being perennially underscored because of software advances over time. Now, with all that being said, let's get into the review. Visuals. For 2015 standard, this game has phenomenal visuals. From the sweeping landscapes to some of the combat effects, this game beautifully captures the universe that Sapkowski described in the books. Aside from some minor nitpicks on the enemy model design, I think the game does a phenomenal job here in technical fidelity. The overall texture and attention to detail in carving out some random stuff, just like bricks, or a wall over the lines on leaves, is done in exquisite detail, something I found very endearing about the game. It also has this uncanny art direction that makes you stick with the game long after you finish playing it. From the bustling cities of Novigrad to the creep mystical nature of Skellige, each biome is not only distinctly rendered, but they all have their unique identity that separates them from each other visually. Honestly, the landscape variety in general is probably the game's best feature. Another thing I don't see get talked about often is the game's excellent character design. From Geralt's face scars to allude to all the dangerous battles he's fought, to Jennifer's purple eyes and swagger to accentuate her femme fatale, this game is very good at tying character traits to their visuals. I'm also quite fond of the visual models they use for a lot of the items and armor sets. I thought that part was also quite well handled, and it's quite fun to see how Geralt's appearance changes as you get better armor. The spell effects was also something that I don't see get talked about often, and I thought it was done magnificently. Now, coming from League of Legends, I'm quite sensitive to various spell effects making sense for what they're trying to do, and I think Witcher 3 absolutely nails it in this aspect. The cutscenes are also done very well for their time, from Geralt's dry sarcasm to Jennifer's sultry wittiness and Ciri's adolescence, was all communicated through the facial expressions and mannerisms and only added to the immersion of the game. There are tons of little side stories that aren't just related to the main story, and I was blown away by the level of detail and care displayed in those side stories as well. The characters' facial expressions and their voice acting, more on that later, really pulls you into the story and makes you feel invested. Aside from certain close-ups during monster reveals feeling a little bit underdeveloped and grainy for their time, most of the environmental design was done very, very well. Just a small other problem I had with how dark it got at night. It became hard to see just about anything during the combat scenes, especially in the dark. I thought the color grading could have been a little bit more even-tuned, but ultimately these are a few nitpicks and nothing crazy. Not gonna dock extra points for that, and I'll happily give The Witcher 3 visuals a perfect 10 out of 10. Now, let's get into the game's plot. Although I think it's excellent, I think people overrate it a little bit too much without observing some of its plot progressions too closely. The main premise of the plot is that Ciri is missing and Geralt has to go on this journey to find her because the Wild Hunt are after her because of her talents and gifts. I think this is a pretty good premise because it introduces the main players very early on, gives clear motives and interests, and sets the stage for the story to progress. The problem starts arising during the pacing. If we split the plot into 3 sections that Geralt goes to find Ciri, then the first region of Velen is easily the best plot point. The Bloody Baron arc and the general introduction to the game was done phenomenally well, and this is the first time in the game where players genuinely start to get a feel for how adult themed the game is. By comparison, Novigrad felt like a little bit too dragged out and the plot really slowed down. Novigrad arc changes the plot from a survival fantasy where we're racing against time to find Ciri before the Wild Hunt does into this weird Sherlock Holmes chase. Like literally the big bad Wild Hunt introduced to us in Velen becomes an afterthought when we start dealing with local gangs and political issues. Like it just took me out of the game completely. So all in all guys, while the start and latter parts of the end are good, the game suffers with a boring and somewhat bloated midsection, and that really slows down the story. Another thing I don't see get talked about often is how underwhelming the Wild Hunt are as villains. The game does an absolutely phenomenal job of creating dread and anticipation around them, but they lose a lot of momentum during the Novigrad arc, and when they finally square up with the protagonist at the end, I was rather underwhelmed with how quickly they got folded, especially Eredin. After their invasion of Kaer Morhen and the fallout after killing Vesemir, it drove the stakes into overdrive, but the final battle between Geralt and Eredin was such a fucking letdown. I expected to be much more emotionally charged and playing into the avenge trope, but I don't know man, I just didn't get that at all. All in all, Witcher 3 has a great premise, good pacing for the start of the game with a genius stroke of dynamic endings, but ultimately loses points for a bloated middle and straight up neglected antagonists. 7 out of 10. Next up, the characters. This might come off a shock to some of you, but I think the character arcs in The Witcher 3 are just kinda average. Listen, the game does a good job of creating strong characters that have easily identifiable traits that all support the story. That part, no one can argue with. Geralt, Yennefer, Vesemir, and sometimes Ciri all have distinct traits and functions within the plot. That's the strong part about this game, is that the characterization. The plot also does its part to test them accordingly. Geralt is under the constant threat of Wild Hunt reaching Ciri before he does. Yennefer is struggling to protect everyone whilst retaining her cold and untouchable exterior. Ciri is lost dodging the Wild Hunt and trying to save Avlog to try and stop the Wild Frost. I think it's this combination of strong premise, good characters, and palpable conflict that make The Witcher stand out in people's memory. I'm here to tell you that yes, while the game is phenomenal at these three things, and they form the narrative backbone of the story, it also fails horribly in other aspects of character arcs. Like I said earlier, the lack of a well-written villain within the story makes everything kinda worthless. Like, what's the point of some good characters if the villains are just basically undercooked chicken and a fucking snowstorm? For instance, Geralt is a decent character, but I think he's more memorable for his legendary exploits than for his character arc. He basically stays the same from start to finish, which is somewhat crucial to the game since he remains the plot's anchor, but that rigidity also cost him the opportunity to develop into something better or even something just different from the start of the game. It's doubly bad as the protagonist because we spend the most time with him and frankly he's just a bit boring. Ciri should have the strongest arc since she's the linchpin given her importance and power in the story, but I feel like she's more of a convenient plot device than someone that goes through a genuine transformation. Because Ciri doesn't get enough screen time, her arc feels sudden and forced instead of gradual and earned. Yennefer, on the other hand, arguably has the best character arc in the whole game. She starts off cold, detached, and pragmatic, and gradually becomes softer and more vulnerable as the game progresses. Unlike Geralt, who remains static, she goes through an arc that retains her core identity and values, but shows her as a much more loving and emphatic person. It's the emotional layering without character assassination that makes her arc really good and especially memorable among the main cast. I also think the side characters actually get better development than main characters here. For instance, the Bloody Baron arc, which is routinely praised as the crowning narrative achievement for The Witcher 3, shows off an incredible arc of how this buffoon of a man is forced to change his ways after a treacherous miscarriage of his daughter from beating his wife. Unfortunately, the Bloody Baron arc came quite hard and fast, and while there are some other side characters that see good development, it's nearly not enough, especially in comparison to the wooden sticks that are Geralt and Ciri. I almost feel like they happen to the story and they're perfect. It's like everyone else that has to change around them. Even though their lives are completely different from start to finish, they feel like they haven't changed at all as a result of their experiences, and that's annoying. So I'll just be giving this a 5 out of 10. I'm interested to see if you guys think I'm being too harsh here. How would you rate the characters in The Witcher 3 and using what rubric? Let me know in the comments below. Coming straight from plot and characters, let's talk about something that's equally important when it comes to a game's emotional footprint: the great voice acting in this game. Now, Geralt can be a bit dry and monotonous in most of the scenes, but I think this is actually a good thing within the context of the story. Doug Cockle, his voice actor, perfectly captures Geralt's identity as a stable anchor in the middle of all the chaos and uncertainty surrounding Ciri and the inevitability of the Wild Hunt. In a world full of chaos and danger, Geralt's delivery makes him a warm, safe zone, and that's immediately felt within just the first few scenes of the game. This is where Geralt's inherent boring characterization actually becomes a strength. Doug conveys a slow, measured, and capable aura for Geralt, befitting that of a legendary monster hunter and the main character. That being said, however, Doug really doesn't seem like he's trying in some of the scenes where a bit of emotion is justified and even recommended, and Geralt does end up sounding like a dying fish in some critical points. Like it gets to the point where it's actually comically bad how monotonous he is.
By blood's power I summon you. With your name I beseech you. Hear my call and arise, Dea!
So I will be taken off a point there, especially since he's the main character. I feel like I've given him enough grace with the anchor justification, so 1 point off feels fair. Yennefer's voice acting is excellent, giving her the right mix of intelligence and wit, while also leaving some room for unexpected bouts of vulnerability within her character arc. From all the main characters, I think Yennefer had the best voice acting, and it's no surprise that her characterization is the best as well. Looking back on it, she really is the standout character of this whole series. I was even surprised at how random characters from side quests had absolutely unbelievable voice acting. The Witcher 3 has a lot of dark and mature themed quests, so without the sides pulling their weight, the emotional ride would have felt jarring outside of the main story. But no, it was sensational from start to finish, spinning on all cylinders, and I have nothing but praise for this game on this category. In fact, the voice acting is so good that it actually masks some of the plot's weak points and lukewarm character development. You almost get lost in the performances of some of these talented actors that you become more willing to sweep the rest of the plot progression under the rug. I'll be giving this a 9 out of 10. Now, let's swap over from narrative points and talk about the combat in The Witcher 3. And yes, it is just as clunky as you remember. I feel like it's even worse on controller than on keyboard. When I first played it, like a few years ago, I played it on keyboard and I didn't think it was too bad. You don't seem to have fine control over Geralt in these combat sequences. He's sort of one slight tug away from completely flying off the handle and ending up bumfuck middle of nowhere and getting swarmed and chained by enemies. The camera movement during some of his more spinny, slashy moves is also out of whack, and it creates for an honestly disorienting experience. His long dodge is equally as frustrating. I find myself just tapping for a quick dodge to reposition instead of rolling around and losing my positioning altogether. The combat system is somewhat saved by its decent depth and versatility. It's not something like Dark Souls that came before it, but it's serviceably good. The versatility is much better than its depth. Having Geralt rely on spells in addition to his basic attacks create a nice flow to the combat, especially when you throw bombs into the mix as well. The parry system is largely useless and far inferior to the quick dodge, and I didn't even bother using it that much. One thing that the game does well for its time is its myriad of enemies. Honestly, the best thing about The Witcher 3 combat is how many different enemies you can find and just how different they are in terms of mechanics and prep. However, I find that most of these mobs have similar attack patterns. It's like they're the same monster with fancy new skins and character models, and I didn't really feel like I was engaging with a varied group that I had to think on the spot on how to beat them. It was just dodge the attacks and just wail away on them, and dodge, wail away on them. It's pretty binary in that sense. So honestly, I think the combat in The Witcher 3 is a little bit below average, so I'll be giving this a 4 out of 10. Straight from the combat, let's also cover the systems and progression schemes that support the gameplay. Now, The Witcher 3 has some excellent systems in place for supporting the fantasy of being a legendary monster hunter. The prep work that's required by reading the bestiary to learn about different monsters and then gathering resources to create specific oils and potions to counter them is a very good point in immersive game design. This single gameplay loop seriously increases the immersion because it puts you in the shoes of a seasoned witcher that meticulously approaches every single encounter. Geralt's experience doesn't make him lax. If anything, it actually enhances his process, which I thought was a really nice touch. He's not a legendary monster hunter because he rests on his laurels, but because he approaches every encounter like it could be his last. But the serious problem is that this fantastic immersive mechanic is non-existent for lower difficulty players. It might as well be disabled from the game. I played the game on normal mode during my first time around, and I genuinely never gave two fucks about the alchemy system. I just crafted whatever I felt like, whenever I felt like, but I didn't realize how important or how immersive it could be. Potions, oils, bombs, and decoctions are supposed to be part of the Witcher fantasy, but on lower difficulties, you can just ignore a lot of that and just face roll your way through the game. This is actually a serious mistake in terms of game design because it means you're essentially punished for picking an easier difficulty by having some very fun and immersive parts of the experience cut from you without you even knowing. So I'll definitely be taking off points for that. Players should be given the full experience despite the difficulty they pick, and I really hold it against the devs when they're unable to fulfill that promise across all difficulty levels, especially when you know that most people will pick easy or normal. On the flip side, they've nailed the progression curve for Geralt. You can enhance the curve by completing more side quests and taking gold on every opportunity, despite like the morality and ethics, but for the most part, the scaling is fine. Crafting and alchemy system are decent enough, but I really wish there was a much easier way to locate some plants and ingredients I needed for my potions. All in all, like that whole crafting and alchemy part, it felt a bit congested, but it was fine for the most part. Overall, I think the game systems and progression total is like kind of above average, nothing crazy, so I'll just be giving this a 6 out of 10. Music. I think the music and BGM in The Witcher 3 are kind of average, all things considered. My favorite thing about the music is how it seems to perfectly adapt to each area and give it a specific tune. Skellige feels dark and mysterious, Novigrad cheery and vibrant, and Velin and Undercurrent melancholy. The atmospheric scoring is the best thing about the music in the game, and it carries a lot of ambiance in conjunction with the absolutely fantastic visuals. That's what creates like the good feel for this game that a lot of you remember it fondly. But that being said, my biggest problem with The Witcher 3's music is that none of it's really memorable after you finish the game. I don't know if it's because it's more ambiance structured, so like while the ambiance part of the music is good, you're not going to really necessarily remember the ambiance, are you? You're just going to need some like actually tracks that stick with you, sort of like Expedition 33 or RDR2 soundtracks, but I can't remember any of them for The Witcher 3. After I stopped playing it, I just can't remember any of the music, so it does lose some points off memorability. All in all, guys, I know this one is going to be a controversial one, but I genuinely feel like that the music here is a 5 out of 10. It does have some good tracks, and the ambiance especially is fantastic, but the repeated combat music, the lack of memorability on its big tracks, docks a lot of points here. Now, moving on to my favorite part about The Witcher 3, and it's the open world. Now listen, I genuinely think The Witcher 3 has one of the greatest open world designs in gaming history. I think the biggest reason why this game was universally lauded as the game of its decade was because how revolutionary the open world design was. There is a ridiculous amount to do, but the impressive part is that so much of it feels meaningfully crafted with extreme attention to detail. Before The Witcher 3, open world content was quite linear and kind of empty, with giant open fields with nothing to do, or they were filled with repetitive fetch quests that padded runtime. The Witcher 3 revolutionized how we conceptualize open worlds, entirely by increasing both scope and detail. There are tons of meaningful short stories with their own plot arcs and dedicated cutscenes that all have real impact on your playthrough. Like I said earlier, some of these side characters have better character arcs than Geralt and Ciri themselves, which is fucking crazy. You're constantly stumbling into people's problems, secrets, and tragedies, and you're forced to make decisions that almost all the time don't really have a happy ending. It generally feels like a collection of interconnected human stories that immerse you into the whole experience itself. It's extremely humanizing because while Geralt is losing his mind trying to find Ciri, the open world reminds you that this isn't the only problem in the world, and there are tons of other people going through similar strife in the midst of the war and the encroaching wild hunt. For how unprecedented the scale and detail of the open world are given that time, I'm actually going to give this an 11 out of 10. It's the primary driving factor on why The Witcher 3 is universally praised for more than a decade straight, and I feel like anything less would not be doing it justice. Next up, Grindiness. I think this game does a pretty decent job of respecting the player's time. It doesn't have any random dumb fetch quests, especially as far as like side content is concerned. Like I said previously, that's one of the best things about the game. As far as stuff like needing external help is concerned, I did find myself using the wiki sometimes for quests, and I feel like it's like a little bit more than usual for finding certain ingredients and stuff like that. But I like some of the systems they have in place for buying or crafting ingredients by locking them. That genuinely saves a lot of time, especially given how dense and uninviting the UI can be when you open your backpack, so that was a bit appreciated. But the big reason why the game loses a lot of points in this category is because the traversal. Whether it's the fast travel or riding on Roach, it's god awful. Like I literally cannot run or ride anywhere without constantly bumping into things. It feels like both Geralt and Roach is moving way too fast to make even the slightest of turns, and it ends up being a 60-second slog to try and reroute from there. I also don't like the fact that you have to get to fast travel checkpoints to use them. I wouldn't mind to only being able to travel to them, but I feel like you should be able to travel to them from anywhere. Like you don't have to like run your ass to a checkpoint and then port over to another checkpoint. That feels like unnecessarily long. So it gains points for having mostly fresh and non-rehashed content, but it loses points for its god-awful traversal design and the occasional external reliance. So I'll be giving this an above average score of 6 out of 10. And last but not least is enjoyability. Now guys, this one doesn't even need an intro, it's just a straight up 10 out of 10. When I first bought this game, I finished both the game and both DLCs in like 4 days. Like 40 hours total in just 4 days. I couldn't put the damn game down for the life of me. From everything from its unbelievable open world design to the combat nailing the aesthetic of a Monster Hunter, The Witcher 3 is a powerful testament to how transcendent games can be when created with care, attention to detail, and a clear vision of where you want to take your product. Whether it's exploring every nook and cranny of Novigrad or fighting bandits and slicing out their limbs one by one, the game is an addictive masterpiece, and I couldn't put it down until I finally finished the main story and its DLCs. So let's tally up everything. Visuals, 10 out of 10. Plot, 7 out of 10. Character arcs, 5 out of 10. Combat, 4 out of 10. Music, 5 out of 10. Voice acting, 9 out of 10. Open world, 11 out of 10. Game systems and progression, 6 out of 10. Grindiness, 6 out of 10. And enjoyability, 10 out of 10. Overall score, 73 out of 100, which I would put as like an excellent tier game. Overall, I think The Witcher 3 is the quintessential RPG game, and it absolutely deserves its reputation as one of the greatest games ever made. An amazing display of ruthlessly investing into breaking the mold by pushing the boundaries of immersion, world building, and immersive game systems without compromising attention to detail or intuitive dialogue. However, unlike what most people try to say it is, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. The combat is clunky and jarring, the music is good for ambience but easily forgettable, the open world is magnificent but navigating it is a pain in the ass. Instead of rating it purely based on how much I enjoyed the game, in which case this game would have gotten the same perfect 10 out of 10 that a lot of you gave it, I think breaking the game down to its fundamental aspects and rating each of them individually allows us to get a more accurate view of the game without getting our emotions involved. As per usual, if you guys disagree with me on my scores or even my rubric, I'd love to know in the comments below. I'm not above changing my stance, or if you guys think there's a serious flaw in it, I just would like to know the reason why. That being said, guys, thanks for watching. I know this is the first time I'm taking a break from the psychology videos I usually make and making a gaming review video. I'll have another video for Ghost of Tsushima coming up. It's coming up on a 6-year anniversary soon, so I would like to release that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So if you guys want to stay tuned for that, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also like the video if you enjoy this kind of content. In my last video, I talked about how there's a concerning new uptick in men repurposing cherry-picked parts of stoicism to isolate themselves from everyone else. It's a pretty fresh take on the topic, so give it a watch and let me know what you guys think. In any case, that's it from me in this video, guys. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.